leave, right? Did you enjoy the show? Oh, yes. Yolanda Rabin. Have you noticed this woman on our stage before? Yes, yes. Tell us how many shows you've been in with us. 6 shows. Newsies, right? Mary Poppins. Okay, yeah. Dream Girls. So next season, basically. You're coming back. All right, well, anyway, everyone, I'm going to get started. Thank you for being here. Yolanda has gracefully been hosting our All-In Community Conversation series since during the pandemic when we were all digital. So you can see some of those online. And most recently, you interviewed Billie Holiday's actual piano player, Corky Stoller, which was amazing. You did a great job. But I'm going to leave it to you and introduce our amazing panelists. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So again, welcome everyone. I'm so glad that you all enjoyed the show today on your feet. Were you on your feet at the end of the show? Yes. Do they have to ask you to get on your feet at the end of the show? Well, excellent. I think you're going to enjoy today's all-in community conversation. And what I'd like to do is let you know that the topic today is the history and influence of Latin art and music in America. And we have 3 amazing people who are going to be a part of this discussion. I'm going to introduce them by name, and then I'm going to ask them to say a little bit about themselves so that they can tell you who they are, and you can know who's going to be telling you all about what this is. So first to my left, we have Atiba Rory. He is the dance music coordinator at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. Do you want to tell us a quick thing about yourself?
Very happy to be here. I consider myself a folklorist. So what that is part ethnomusicology, part anthropology, part geography, part everything else. But I do that from the perspective of drums, essentially. So I specialize in West African and Afro-Cuban music and folklore and other diasporic forms as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Atiba. Next, we have Beto Herrera. He is the founder and director of Mambo Dinamico Dance Company.
Hi. I've been in this area for 20 years. My dance company, its purpose is to educate people in the culture through dance. So what we do is everything that Atiba dance with music, we do with dance. We actually know each other. We have worked together many times. So I try to research and understand how movement has been evolved from Africa through the Caribbean into the Americas and so forth. So that's basically in a nutshell.
Thank you. So next, and not last, I should say, is Ms. Lizette Cruz Waco. She is the founder and the executive director of the, am I saying Diamante? Arts and Cultural Center. Diamante works to recognize the achievements, preserve the heritage, showcase the art, culture, and artistic expressions of the diverse Latino, Hispanic community in North Carolina.
Do I need to say anything else? You said it all. But thank you so much. It is an honor to be on the same stage with you, or at least a panel with you. This lady is just amazing. Yes, I'm Lisette Cruz Waco. I've been in North Carolina for 30 years. It is hard for me to say that. I moved from LA to North Carolina to follow my husband's dream, and he ended up staying in North Carolina for my dreams. So here we are.
Thank you. So I'll say again, for those of you who just joined us, I am Yolanda Rabin. I'm actually here from North Carolina. I have been here at least 28 years. I am a singer and a performing artist, a producer, and a lover of theater and of all kinds of music. And I'm really, really glad that you all chose to be here with us today. Again, the topic is history and influence of Latin art and music in America. So I'm going to ask the first question of our panelists, and it is, in this show, we hear Emilio passionately point out that his face is what an American looks like. I want you all to talk to us a little bit about how Latin culture, specifically Latin art and music, has been and still is influential in our country. Who wants to take that first?
One of the guys. Okay. I guess I'll go first. I'll lead you into your answer. Okay, so uh, it didn't happen overnight. It happened through different stages, and we can talk about the connections between African American music and Caribbean music, like especially Hispanic Caribbean music, all day long. We can talk about this for hours. Okay, but there are connections. But in a nutshell, so the chance stayed in African American people when they first came into the New World, and that's what later on evolved into jazz. Okay, because they were not allowed to keep their drums. The slave owners at that time, they thought that they will communicate and organize themselves, and so they will took those drums away from them. In the Caribbean, they will have a saying in Spanish that goes like "Cada negro tiene su domingo," which means every black has his Sunday, right? So on Sundays they were able to practice some of those cultural things that they did, like dance and music and so forth. So that's what we had. We're able to maintain the percussion a little bit more in the Caribbean. And there was a couple of big influences and connections between Louisiana, New Orleans specifically, and Cuba, where this story about they put it together like three brothers. One stayed in Africa, the other one stayed in the Caribbean, and the other one came to the United States. They're still brothers. They're still related. So what happens later on, they just got together again because they were always meant to be together. Okay, so that's part of it. And within all these times, I mean, you want to talk about a little bit about the jazz?
Well, I'll talk about that. So Dizzy Gillespie goes to Cuba and hooks up with a cat named Chano Pozo. And then they have their whole exchange, and therefore we get kind of Latin jazz, right? But I would like to say even before then, Latin music was in America. Before then, right? 1950s, the sacred drums of Nigeria that were recreated in Cuba came to New York in the 50s. And then even before that, there was still the influence of the same, like he's saying, the same brother, the same people from Africa that were here, that were also dropped off in the Caribbean. So, for example, there are stories that Jack Johnson, the famous boxer, he had African drums at his fights, and they say that's why he won so much. And the drums were banned from his fights because they thought that's what's giving him his power, right? These are the same drums, the same rhythmic patterns that people were playing in Cuba, right? And then as well in Puerto Rico. Same thing you start to see in Haiti. There's a big Haitian connection between Haiti and the United States by way of Catherine Dunham, and her bringing Haitian folklore to the U.S. So there's a huge thing. I think the biggest place it shows up is in when you look at music from the African American community, specifically Motown, Philadelphia, and then therefore L.A. All of those bands had Latin percussion. All of them. All of them had somebody who specifically played congas. All of them, right? Even the fact that we call the drum conga is from American television. It's from the I Love Lucy show, right? So that influence, these drums are not called conga, right? That's not the traditional name for them. It's the name that's been given to them because of American TV.
So what is the traditional name?
Jicamo Mombisa. And these, as well as like the history behind these drums, right? These drums come from the mind of the people of the Congo nation. And you see different variations of it, right? It looks like this in Cuba. They look like bomba drums in Puerto Rico. Same people, same hand technique, same concept as far as connection to the dance. The fact that we use the term salsa is from America, right? That's not what the music is called.
So what should the term be called?
Right.
Help us, educate us. What should it be called?
There are, son would be the overarching thing, son, right? Son is the tree. The tree is called son, S-O-N. But in America, we would say sun. And like, why are we playing sun music? No. right? And then there are different branches of the tree based upon geographically where people are located, right? Even the fact that congas are a part of salsa music now, it didn't even start that way. So there's just mixtures all over the place that we don't necessarily know and completely recognize or see because it went together, like he said, so well, because it was just brothers reuniting again. You know what I mean? And conceptually, certain types of things. There's always been a parade of sorts in New Orleans. They call it second line, right? They have comparsa in Cuba. They have junkanoo, right? All kind of things like that. So they're all similarities all over the place.
But I love how you're talking about, because the question was about how does Latin culture, specifically Latin art and music, actually still influences us today. You're going to tell us something, Lizette?
I wanted to put in a little bit of the art because I'm not a musicologist. So in art, we go even further back. In the 1920s, you had the tres grandes, they used to call them, the muralists. And you might know Diego Rivera, but the other two are David Alfaro and Clemente Orozco, who influenced muralism in the United States. Before that, it was like, oh, that was so foreign, you know? And the way that these three gentlemen influenced culture through the art of the murals. And not only did they influence overall culture, but they were very instrumental in influencing black muralists of the time. People that didn't think they can put political messages or cultural traditions within their art, like Aaron Douglas or Charles White. Those are two big muralists, African-American muralists that were influenced by these three guys. But then you get into the 50s, you know, you start getting a lot more influence, and you have the Chicano art movement, you have the New Yorican art movement, and so forth. So you start getting the artists more involved as the music starts developing. And you have all these other movements in the 70s, and you have big institutions that are still around, like the Galeria de la Raza in San Francisco, and then you have Gala Theater in Washington, D.C., and you have Museo del Barrio, and all these institutions that are still around that because of all the movements, art movements in the 70s, and they happen to still be around, and they're wonderful institutions and great educational tools to use. So there's, I mean, you can go the 60s with the, you know, civil rights, Viva la Raza, Si se puede, and all that kind of stuff that we still hear today. All that stuff was from the 60s. And so it all evolves also with the music. You know, the more the music becomes mainstream, so does the culture and so does the art.
So I love that you told this story of these three brothers, right? Because the fact that they can influence each other, I think is part of how it is that we have our Latin music and art mixed with maybe even African American music and art, and even what may be considered American art, whatever that looks like. I want to ask you, in On Your Feet, the audience, they get a look at just how instrumental Gloria Estefan was in breaking down barriers by doing the seemingly impossible, right? She crosses over from Latin radio. It was amazing. Don't you remember that part in the show? When they said it wasn't possible, she crosses over to the mainstream American pop music. But in your opinion, in what ways has this blending of cultures historically played an important role in art or even in music?
Well, in art, it helps communicate. It helps us share experiences. It helps us develop or maintain cultures. Because a lot of times, you know, this is a country of immigrants. Unless you're a native, you're an immigrant. And you're descendant of an immigrant. So I think Latino culture, and that I put that into quotes because Latino can mean a lot of different things. The music, the art, the folklore, and the gastronomy, for some reason, has been stronger in keeping culture alive. And in some cultures have actually disappeared, not disappeared, but they've blended in more, like the Italians and the Irish. Those things have become, synonymous with America and not so much with Irish and Italian, unless you're like Irish and Italian and you keep that going, right? So Latinos, we have over 20 countries represented, so everybody wants to keep a little bit of their country alive. So I think that's one of the reasons why we, maintain culture through the arts.
Beto?
Can you repeat the question again?
The question is, in your opinion, in what ways has the blending of cultures historically played an important role in art and music?
Oh, great.
Your brother's story.
Yes, so the brother. So I'm gonna quote Dizzy Gillespie because he mentioned that early. Dizzy Gillespie said, yeah, he actually repeated this quote many times. He said, "I don't speak Spanish. He doesn't speak English, but we both spoke Africa." So he was talking about Chano Pozo, the conga player that he actually seek to put in his band. And there are two different rhythms that are very predominant in Latin music. One is tresillo, and the other one is the clave. So tresillo goes like and you hear it like dancehall music all the time, right? And you have the clave brush my teeth. Toothbrush. That's how so I teach. Yeah, I'm a school teacher.
I felt all of that. I felt all of that.
So I teach a St. Mary Magdalene Catholic school. We teach Latin dance class. So one of the homeworks that I gave my students was I want you to find those rhythms in any pop American music that was recorded within your lifetime. So these are 7th and 8th graders, so they cannot go back more than 15 years. And they found a bunch of these tracks. Like, for instance, the All of Me by John Legend. That one has a dun, 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 dun at the beginning. They have Taylor Swift songs. They have Justin Bieber, Imagine Dragons, like all of this music. And I didn't even know. I was like, damn, this is really good. I'm going to keep this list for myself. But they did my work. But you have all of this music that has these rhythms that are embedded into in Latin culture, more specifically Afro-Caribbean music, and it's basically spread out and influenced so many musics around the world. And so when we talk about blending of cultures, I like to think about these 4 terms. One is amalgamation, which is like when 2 cultures melt together and they form a new one. The other one is acculturation, when we have dominant culture that is taking part of a less dominant culture. Mm-hmm. Then you have assimilation, where you have a smaller culture that's trying to assimilate to a bigger culture, and then appropriation, which is the wrong way to doing things. So all of these things happen naturally. Okay, it's just part of whenever 2 cultures exchange something, they get influenced to each other, and it is going to happen. Okay, so you see it, but it has happened for so long, and it's been little bits at the time. Like, for instance, if I tell you that tresillo was in the musical Carmen, you will be like, what? Yes, it was in the musical Carmen. Okay, and it was like one of the main rhythms that helped the first version of jazz, which was what is the first version of jazz? I forgot. Yeah, the word was the first version of jazz.
No, the first version of jazz?
Yeah.
Does anyone know what the first version of jazz was?
It was in New Orleans. I can't remember right now. I've been running around all day. Sorry?
Dixieland jazz?
Yeah, like Dixieland jazz. And then they were like, mute, 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 mute. It was the same tresillo. They just muted a third note. Okay, and so it's just been there the whole time. So, but he's been there. So it's so common that we neglect to recognize where these rhythms came from. Okay. And then you have popular artists, and then when I talk popular artists, they don't look like us, So then people start forgetting where these traditions come from, and so forth. But we always been here. So whenever Emilio says look at me, this is what America looks like.
Yeah.
We've been here for a long time. Okay.
Right.
It's just now for the past 50, 60, 80 years that we've been actually getting recognition and opportunities to show our craft.
Were you thinking ragtime?
Ragtime. Yes, ragtime.
Ragtime. So, Atiba, would you like to comment on that, or shall I keep going?
Well, I just want to say that one of the greatest examples, I think, is hip hop. If you understand the origin of hip hop, it's because these people and these people were neighbors and they wanted to do something together because their suffrage was the same. So through that suffrage, they wanted to talk about it and tell these stories, and they used these 5 essential elements and all kind of stuff. But I personally think that hip hop is a great example, and I'm not talking about what's on the radio now, like actual hip hop music that has positive information and things to say, because it literally it's a fusion of African Americans and Latin Americans coming together and creating this whole new thing, right? And then we get fast forward that and say, okay, now people from Jamaica, Trinidad, Tobago, Bahamas, reggaeton. It's happening again. Right now, it's happening again, right? Bad Bunny is selling out all over the world, using elements from all of these things So I think that's for me, I think the greatest example of that.
I love that. So, as you all were watching On Your Feet, did you recognize many of the songs from your youth, perhaps, from Gloria? Yeah, so we know and we love her songs, and of course it's not just Gloria, but it's also she and the Miami Sound Machine. And so many of us, I think, can perhaps relate to the story of finding success, right, as a Cuban-American immigrant inspiring. But I want to know from you all, do you have a personal connection to the music or the story of Gloria and Emilio Estefan?
I was telling Beto that I was in high school when Miami Sound Machine came out, and what was the first song? Gosh, now I forgot it. But it was like, OMG. I totally identify with this. As a Latina from the Caribbean living in LA, I was like, oh, I found my home, because obviously it's much more Mexican influence. So, you have the Mexican cumbia and those kind of beats.
Right.
They were prevalent back in the 80s. And in LA, so you didn't hear tropical sounds.
Right.
Unless you purposely went to, at least for me, a Cuban club,
Right.
or a Cuban social club, which is something they had in different towns in LA.
Right.
But me as a Dominican Puerto Rican, I had to go to the Cuban club because there was nobody else. There weren't any Dominicans or Puerto Ricans in LA. So I totally identified with the Cuban culture as well as identifying with my own, tropical Caribbean self, But on top of that, she had a beautiful Christmas album. I don't know if you guys have ever heard her Christmas album. It's beautiful. And there is a song in there called Arbolito. And when Diamante started the Three Kings Day Estrella de la Esperanza campaign, we were trying to figure out a name for one of the events, and we called it Arbolito because of the Gloria Estefan version of Arbolito.
Yeah, see, that's another way I can say to reemphasize how much influence she has had on us and just this world. And I can just tell you my personal connection is me llamo Yolanda. So I'm actually from Miami, Florida. I was born in Miami. And when I was a little girl, I thought, I could just speak the Spanish and everything, and then I moved away, and it all went away, and so I'm sad. But that said, when I was in Miami, I remember what I would feel just in the air. It's just something about, talk about mix of culture in Miami. And I remember that this woman came out who was this singer, and she was short. And that, of course, got me excited. And then her name was the same as my auntie, which I love. So the question is, what's your personal connection? And so this is mine. And she could sing. I mean, she really could sing. And so the beauty of that is that as much as I talk about wanting to see someone who looks like me to influence me in my own artistry, this woman identified with me for many different reasons. It wasn't the color of my skin. And it was her art. And it was the way she sang and how she made people feel when she sang. And I like that, and I wanted to be a part of that. And I think that any artist who can just find a way to identify with the gift that you have and give it to others, and especially that in her case it's Latina music, and it's authentic to who she is, you can't get wrong. You can't go wrong with that. So that's my personal connection to Gloria, and I'm so excited. I remember when the accident occurred, and just the way they did it in the show, it just made me jolt, like, oh, I remember that happened to her. And the thought that people were writing and concerned that her life would be gone, and that it's not. Yeah. And she's here. And they created a musical. And we can see it in her love, and we're here on this panel, and oh my goodness, we can't stop talking about it. So I'm gonna stop talking. I'm gonna ask you gentlemen, tell me, if you have any, what is your personal connection?
Well, for me, it's as a musician and a person who creates new music, I think about where it came from first. And I think it's interesting to see how, no matter how far forward they pushed with what they did, they based it upon something that already existed. Because, I mean, one of my teachers says all the time, it's really nothing new under the sun. We've been here long enough. It ain't nothing new under the sun, you know? So it's important to look back and maintain some of those things to you know, you got to look back to go forward. Like Sankofa is a bird that looks backwards, but it walks forward. So that's, for me, is the main thing.
Love that. Beto?
Well, for me as a dancer, of course, I want music that makes me want to move. And then when I hear those beats, like for instance, they were playing comparsa. There was a song, I think it's called Cuba Libre, that it was kind of like comparsa and also kind of like pilon. And you guys are looking at me like, what the heck is he talking about? Okay, it's all like terms that's all salsa dances. Okay, that under that tree that we're talking about. You know, there's like, especially like the choreography that they did today, and like whenever they were doing these movements, this is a Orisha god, okay, from Yoruba land, from the Nigeria, called Oya. She's the goddess of the wind. Okay, when there was another one when they were doing this into the front, that's Oshun. She's the one that represents beauty. So she's taking baths in rivers. Yeah, there's when they were. What was that? When there was the step that they were doing this, that's Shango, the god of thunder. So like all of these rhythms, they represent something. The movements, they represent something. They make you want to dance. And for people that recognize those rhythms and understand what they represent, it has like a really deep meaning for us. So when I see that music, it's like, man, it's like she really like hit it hard on that comparsa. She like really hit that guaguancó right there. Like one of the first numbers that they did, that was a guaguancó. It's an Afro-Cuban rumba, not the rumba that you see on Dancing with Us. That we're talking about appropriation, you know, like that's appropriation. Okay, so this is a completely like the different things. Like these things have meanings. Every movement the way that we move our hips, okay, side to side. Those are when he talked about the Bantu people from the Congo. That means fertility. Okay, so when we dance, that means fertility. That's what everybody looks at us. Ooh, I know what you know. Okay, so he's like, but it doesn't mean fertility in sex connotation. It has like it's like a human.
I love that you spelled that out. That was very kind.
Yeah. The children in the audience. Okay. So that's like all of these things have meaning. So when as a dancer, when I see that, it makes me want to get up and dance. You know.
Yeah. So you this is a great segue, honestly, for us to get ready to say goodbye to you all. I want to first of all remind you that you have actually been listening to All In Community Conversations. This is all about On Your Feet. I'm so happy that you all came out today to see this wonderful show. There is another show tonight at 7:30. And then another one on tomorrow. So I want you to go out and tell your friends about what you experienced today so that they can not leave this atmosphere that these wonderful actors and musicians have brought to us and come back and be a part of it. Today we have been listening to Atiba, Rory, Beto Herrera, and Lizette Cruz Waco. I am Yolanda Rabin. I can tell you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I did remember something. And on our way out, would you do us the honor of playing, tell me what they're called? They're not congos, they are?
Hickama.
Hickama. could you play us some beautiful, wonderful sounds?
You want to dance and let him play?
Come on, Beto.
And I invite all of you all to get on your feet and dance. I'm so serious. This is how we do it. North Carolina Theater.
You're gonna play the conga rhythm, okay? So the actual comparsa is the rhythm, conga is the dance.
Hey, I learned something. Come on, get on your feet, y'all.
There you go.
Come on, young ones, I see you out here.
Oh my gosh. That was too close.
Thank you all once again. Thank you so much for joining us. This is All In Conversations. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. And remember, tell people to come back to see On Your Feet. Thank you all.